you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back in Hawke's Bay. I've got a number of very good friends here, some who were involved in the National Party when I was involved in the National Party, and some I've known even longer than that. Very good to be back. It's almost exactly 13 years ago this week when I gave a speech to the Orewa Rotary Club. It became known as Brash's Orewa Rotary Club. I've actually spoken there 5 times, but there's only one The Orewa Rotary Club speech. For a brief time, it converted Orewa from a place to a date. People talked about before Orewa and after Orewa, rather than north of Orewa or south of Orewa. And when I gave that speech, the media reaction was that Brash had really shot himself in the foot this time. It wrecked the National Party. Polls would go down, and a terrible mistake. And of course the media were absolutely wrong. The National Party's poll jumped so sharply in response to that speech that Cormac Brendan, which of course does the TV1 polling, redid the poll because they assumed there had been a mistake. It was the largest single jump between 2 successive polls in Cormac Brendan's history. People have said to me subsequently, why on earth didn't you do that speech closer to the 2005 election? If you had, you would almost certainly have won. And that may well be true. As Tom said, we very nearly won in 2005. In fact, after the election, final votes were counted, 57 MPs wanted me to be Prime Minister, 57 wanted Helen, and Winston was doing his normal sort of will I, won't I act, and of course you jumped with Helen. But the thing which was odd about that speech was that I didn't see myself as saying anything terribly radical at the time. I had said when I first became leader that there were 5 main issues I wanted to focus on as leader, one of which was this issue. And because the Foreshore and Seabed Act was going through Parliament at the time, I decided to give my first major speech as leader on this issue. But I thought I was simply following in a well-trodden track. Now let me just quote from a speech, and unless you've read my Orewa speech given 10 days ago, you won't know who this speech is from, I don't think. But let me just quote this speech, given in the year 2000. The treaty is a wonderful stick for activists to beat the rest of us with. It's been the basis of a self-perpetuating industry in academic and legal circles. The treaty cannot be any kind of founding document, as it is sometimes said to be. It does not resolve the question of sovereignty, if only because one version of it claims one form of sovereignty, and the other version claims the opposite. The Court of Appeal once absurdly described it as a partnership between races, and it certainly is not. As our increasingly dismal National Day continues to show, the treaty is no basis for nationhood. It doesn't express the fundamental rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and it doesn't have any unifying concept. The treaty itself contains no principles which can usefully guide government or courts. It is a bald agreement anchored in time and place, and the public interest in it is the same as the public interest in forcing any properly made agreement. To go further than that is to acknowledge the existence of undemocratic forms of government, of rights, entitlements, or sovereignty, unquote. That was David Longing in the year 2000. In May 2002, Bill English, then leader of the National Party, discussed the treaty in a speech, a long speech, carefully written, and noted that, and I quote again, Hobson and the missionaries took great pains to explain to Maori the decisions they had to make and the kind of sovereignty and order the British would create. Maori were prepared to cede their sovereignty because of the anticipated benefits of a common, non-segregated polity in New Zealand. The solution to the challenges the treaty presents to all New Zealanders lies in a single standard of citizenship for all, unquote. That was Bill English in 2002. In May 2003, Bill English gave a speech, I heard him give it, promising that a future national government would abolish separate Maori electorates, as the 1980s Royal Commission on the Electoral System had in fact recommended if MMP were adopted. In 2005, believing that historical grievances would damage race relations in New Zealand if they dragged on endlessly, I also made a commitment that treaty settlements should be resolved over 6 years after the National Party won the election. And in fact, that same 6-year timetable was one adopted by John Key in 2008, who also, by the way, in that election campaign, committed to scrapping Maori electorates. Tragically, we've been moving in exactly the wrong direction ever since. The national government has certainly sped up the resolution of historical treaty settlements, and I think that's been very positive. I commend them for that. But too often, the resolution of treaty settlements has involved not just financial redress, but also so-called co-governance, giving unelected tribal appointees the right to have a decision-making role in local government. Maori electorates, created for just 5 years in 1867, for a very good reason, because at that time the only people who had a vote were men who owned property. And of course at that time most property was owned by, most Maori property was owned communally, not individually, so almost no Maori men had a vote at that point of time. So the Maori electorates are set up so that all Maori men could get a vote, no matter whether they owned property or not. As I say, set up for 5 years, 150 years later this year, they're still with us. And the government has certainly quietly abandoned any suggestion they should be scrapped. And we have a Labour Party MP with a bill in the next ballot saying that we should be entrenching the Maori electorate, which means they're almost impossible to get rid of. And this despite the fact that, as Casey said, there are some 25 Maori in Parliament now, including, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister, and number 5 in the Cabinet, also, of course, Maori, Simon Bridges. So that it's not as if Maori can't get elected. They get elected on their merit, which is exactly, of course, as it should be. A bill to amend the RMA is now wending its way through Parliament, and if it's passed in its present form, will require every local government within 30 days of election to invite their local iwi into so-called iwi participation arrangements, which will entrench co-governance on a grand scale. The legislation is setting up the Auckland Super City, which said there had to be an independent Maori statutory board made up of unelected appointees, and Auckland Council chose to give the members of this council 2 voting entitlements on most Auckland Council committees. For several years now, the government has been talking about, behind closed doors, about how to give Maori special rights over water. And this is despite the fact that government has long held that nobody does own water, and despite decisions about the allocation of water being traditionally the exclusive rights of elected local governments. Interestingly, I came across a wonderful quote recently by a man called David Rankin. You may not know of David Rankin in Hawke's Bay, but he's well known in Auckland. There are several David Rankins in Auckland actually. One's a prominent Auckland Council staff member. But this David Rankin's full name is David Honihiki Rankin, and he's a direct descendant of one of the people who signed the treaty. And he said about water, prior to the arrival of Europeans in New Zealand, Maori never owned water. And even after Europeans arrived, Maori never owned water. So there is no cultural basis or historical precedent for the claim. Neither is it a treaty right. This is just a case of opportunism. And on the basis of the foreshore and seabed issue, Maori have learned that if we keep pushing for the right to something, eventually a weak government will give in and hand it over to us. This is how iwi corporations have secured Auckland's mountains, national parks, foreshore and seabed, mining rights, forestry rights, and radio frequencies, unquote. That's from David Rankin, who's become a very good friend, I have to say. In recent months, discussions have been going on, also largely below the radar, about the Hauraki Golf Forum. it's proposed that half of the members of this group, there should be 16 in total, half of them will be tribal appointees, one appointed by the Auckland Council, one by the Hauraki Council, one by the Waikato Regional Council, and 5 government appointees. Last year, we saw the Maori King saying that he hoped that by 2025, Maori would share sovereignty in New Zealand. Nobody pointed out to him that all Maori already share sovereignty in New Zealand. They all have a vote. But I suspect that wasn't what he had in mind. Very recently, we've seen Labour and the Greens say that making learning te reo should be compulsory in all schools, even though I believe that learning to read and write English would be of enormous benefit to a great number of our people in schools. And that's not just, of course, because English is the predominant language in New Zealand, but it is the international language. It's the language of almost all international commerce, it's the language of almost all scientific journals, and it is the universal language in aviation. The German piloted plane of Lufthansa lands in Frankfurt Airport, Germany. The German pilot talks to ground control in English. Increasingly, we see unfounded claims that the treaty involves some kind of partnership between the Maori people and the Queen. And we see this idea of partnership particularly being promoted in the education and health sectors. Indeed, endorsing this concept of partnership seems to be almost essential for any kind of leadership appointment in the public sector. As Winston Peters said in a speech earlier this month in Paihia, and I quote, "If no one in the British Empire was in partnership with Queen Victoria on the 5th of February 1840, how come the New Zealand Maori was one day later?" The expression partnership is either creative and legally and constitutionally wrong, or it had to include every New Zealander, regardless of ethnic background, being in partnership with the Crown, unquote. Last, and by all means least, the newly formed Opportunities Party is so confused by this imagined partnership that it wants to create an upper house of Parliament with half its members being Maori. I have no idea how Gareth Morgan, who is in some respects not a bad economist, can come to that quite extraordinary conclusion. As I said earlier, those of us who say these developments are totally inconsistent with any reasonable interpretation of the treaty or the meaning of democracy are routinely viewed as racists, even though what we're advocating is not only not racist, is in fact the exact opposite of racism. We're not arguing for privilege for any race, we're arguing that all races should have the same rights and privileges at law. To call what we're saying racist is Orwellian doublespeak. It's important to stress that we're not arguing that Maori are privileged in any economic sense. While a few Maori are among the wealthiest in the land, average Maori incomes are obviously well below the average for most other New Zealanders. And of course, because of that, Maori New Zealanders rightly receive a larger share of government spending on education and welfare. Most government spending is rightly geared to need and not to ethnicity. But we say that giving constitutional preferences to those with a Maori ancestor, along with many other ancestors of course, is leading us down the road to racial conflict. And who benefits from this unprincipled constitutional preference? Assuredly not most Maori. They gain absolutely nothing from such preferences, which overwhelmingly benefit only the Maori and Pākehā elite. It is that elite who get the big directors' fees, and fees paid when consulting with Maori is a legal requirement. It's the same elite who get to play with the millions handed out in treaty settlements, not Maori truck drivers, or freezing workers, or builders, or the thousands of others in the workforce. Many Maori in professions, business and trades resent being patronised by current policies, which seem to imply that without special privileges, they're not quite good enough to make it on their own. They know they are. They want what Governor Hobson said, as each chief signed the treaty, to say, true today, we are now one people. In 1932, and I'm quoting Sir Nata as well, but 18 years earlier than Casey's quotation, Sir Nata wrote that the second part of Article 3 of the treaty, which, quote, imparts to all the Maori people of New Zealand all the rights and privileges of British subjects, unquote, was the most important part of the treaty. This article, he said, represents the greatest benefit bestowed upon the Maori people by Her Majesty the Queen. It states that the Maori and Pākehā are equal before the law, that is, they are to share the rights and privileges of British subjects. Those of us behind the Hobson's Pledge Trust share the view of great leaders like Sir and Governor Hobson that New Zealanders became one people when the treaty was signed. We reject absolutely the notion that the treaty created different rules and different rights for those of the Maori ancestor and those without. We stand proudly with Martin Luther King, who said, "I have a dream that my children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character." That's our goal. And I believe it's the heart of who we are and what we want New Zealand to be. Those who built this country were determined to put rank and status and privilege behind them. They wanted this to be a land of equals. An egalitarian land where your choices and your chances didn't depend on class or colour, but on character. Yes, we've failed sometimes, but let's not fail again. We cannot abolish privilege by creating privilege. By agreeing to do so, our politicians are creating a new injustice and poisoning our future. I say the racism of our elite has done its dash and had its day. If you share that vision, please do join Hobson's Pledge and help us spread the word. Especially this year, when you can tell your Member of Parliament and anybody standing for election to Parliament that you want New Zealand to be, as Martin Luther King said, a place where every citizen, irrespective of the colour of their skin, is treated as an equal. Ask anybody seeking your vote, which do you support? A single standard of citizenship or race-based rights for some? If they won't answer you or say they support race-based rights, then tell them they will not get your vote. And finally, challenge our Prime Minister to explain how current policy is even remotely consistent with the National Party's long-standing commitment to equal citizenship written into the National Party Constitution, and his own unambiguous statement in 2002 that the solution to the challenges that the treaty presents to all New Zealanders lies in a single standard of citizenship. Thank you very much.